We now turn our attention to West Asia. For over a decade, the West Asian region had witnessed violence, bloodshed and strife. From a civil war in Syria, to terrorism in Iraq, to bombings in Yemen, the region remained a hotbed of conflicts, causing close to 1 million casualties and creating global refugee crisis. While each of these conflicts had a unique context, the common theme between all of them was the regional rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Divided on sectarian lines, the power struggle between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran led to the creation of proxies across the West Asian region, with Iran backing the Houthi rebels in Yemen, Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon, and even Sunni Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Of course, the region is rich in natural resources like oil. The region also had military bases of superpowers like the US and Russia, among others. But something was cooking behind the scenes.
The pictures that shocked the world. Top officials from Iran and Saudi Arabia met in Beijing. And after 4 days of hectic negotiations mediated by China, the announcement was made. Iran and Saudi Arabia had decided to resume ties. Ties that could help restore stability in the region. With Iran offering a cushion from any attempts to sabotage the talks, both the countries decided to restart embassies that had been shut down in 2016. The Saudi foreign minister visited Tehran shortly after the truce was announced. Within weeks of the thaw between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the process of inclusion began for Iran's proxies. A peace process was launched for the Houthis in Yemen. The rebel leaders that had overthrown the Saudi-backed leadership during the so-called Arab Spring had been at war with Saudi Arabia. Now their leaders were flown to Riyadh for peace talks. Iran-backed Syrian President Bashar al-Assad got an invitation for the Arab League meetings for the first time since 2011. Syria was expelled from the grouping in 2011 after the outbreak of the civil war. The undisclosed talks in Beijing, followed by all these developments, caught the West by surprise. The US hegemony in the region was being challenged, and Washington was in no mood to loosen its grip on the region. Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, confirmed to the world that Saudi Arabia was in talks with Israel and that a US-mediated pact was in the works. The normalization of relations with Israel meant the issue of Palestinian statehood would get swept under the carpet. The precedent was already there. In 2020, Arab nations like United Arab Emirates and Bahrain had signed normalization deals with Israel. And now Saudi Arabia too was looking to close a defense deal with the US as part of this normalization pact with Israel. It was early morning when air raid sirens rang in Jerusalem. Hundreds of rockets were fired into south and central Israel, and they all came from Gaza. This was followed by Hamas gunmen barging into Israel, opening indiscriminate fire and fleeing back to Gaza with almost 250 hostages. Days later, Israel counted at least 1,200 casualties in the deadly terror attack that caught the world by surprise. Shocked by the audacity of the attack, Israel declared war on Hamas. What followed in Gaza was mayhem. Rockets, missiles, air raids, tanks. The Israeli Defense Forces flattened the Gaza Strip, bringing down buildings, many of them with residents still inside. The death toll in Gaza began spiraling. Each day, hundreds of dead bodies arrived at hospitals in North and Central Gaza, where thousands of people with bombing-related injuries were being treated. Hospitals, schools, relief camps. Israel's bombing was relentless. With social media flooded with images of dead bodies, including that of Palestinian women and children, wide-scale protests were triggered across the streets of West Asia. From Iran to Iraq and from Jordan to Lebanon, the Arab and Islamic world were up in arms. At the beginning of the year, not many analysts would have predicted this. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi's arrival in Riyadh was one of the most significant developments in the region's recent history. Leaders of the Arab League as well as those from Islamic countries buried their differences to attend the extraordinary summit for Gaza. At the end of the summit, the grouping sent out a desperate call for a ceasefire. The outrage in the Arab world also meant Mohammed bin Salman would now find it difficult to still pursue the Israel normalization deal. The year that started with hope for peace in the region was once again caught in the cycle of violence, with geopolitics once again throwing the region into turmoil.